that China is wholly unable to guarantee or even influence by itself. It is completely at the mercy of American commitment to the Bretton Woods system, a commitment that is now collapsing, which means that the Chinese need to find a fundamentally different economic model, and because their political system is based on their economic performance, a completely different political model. President Xi has seen this coming, and he spent the last 6 years consolidating the political space within the Chinese system and, in essence, publicly executing anyone who is an independent pole of power on live television so that the Chinese have no doubt who's in charge. And if you remember back to last November when the Chinese Communist Party met at the Great Hall of the People, they basically made him dictator for life. And he has now consolidated more power unto his one person than any Chinese leader in history, including the emperors and including Mao, because he knows that the economic system is facing a high velocity crash that it's not going to survive. And if the Chinese have to make a choice between a China that is authoritarian, unified, closed off from the world and poor, or one with multiple power centers that can be exploited from the outside, where some provinces do well and others don't, and the whole thing fractures, for the Chinese, that's not a choice. For long-term winners, let's set North America to the side for a moment, because there's a lot of domestic things in the United States, Mexico, and Canada that are going to shape that in a direction that has nothing to do with the international system. But for the rest of the world, there's really 4 big winners. The first is Japan. Here's a country that, because of its demographic aging, has figured out a way to have a modern economy without having a workforce. It's all based on automation and forward-positioned facilities in countries they want good relations with. They have become the de facto determiners of what the Western Pacific looks like. And that means, among other things, an end to China as a significant power. That's something they like very much. The big challenge for them is, how do you digest politically the smaller countries that maybe don't have the best relationship with you? Korea's being at the top of that list. Moving over to the Western Hemisphere, Argentina. Argent-freaking-tina looks really good. Their topography is very similar to the United States. They've got the equivalent of the American Midwest and the Pampas. They've got naturally navigable interconnected waterways to serve as natural transport arteries. The climate is good. They get winter, so there's an insect kill, so the health system is good. They've got great wine. And they don't have any security challenges. There's no one within 5,000 miles of them that bears them ill will or has the capacity to get to them in the first place. So as Brazil falls, Argentina can pick up every bit of that looks interesting to them. And if you look at what their traditional exports are, oil, natural gas, iron, wheat, corn, poultry, pork, beef, in a world where global supply chains are breaking down and famine's probably coming back, they have everything that the world needs. And they're going to be able to get top dollar for it. Third country, France. Yes, they're in the EU. Yes, when it goes away, it's going to be a big problem. The French created the EU to achieve a political and strategic goal. They never saw it as an economic union. It's just like what the United States did with Bretton Woods. Sacrifice some economics in order to get some security strategic advantages. So the French never integrated into the EU as much as any of the other major members. So for them, it's like 15 to 20% of GDP is wrapped up in trade. For the Germans, it's 40 to 60% based on where you draw the line. So they will have a very painful adjustment period, but on the back end of this, not only are they not going to be involved in any of the wars of the disorder, they don't even border a country that is going to be near a front line. So they have Europe's second most powerful military and second most powerful navy, but no security challenges. They're an exporter of food. Their manufacturing supply chain base has been kept national because they're French. And they can even get energy from their former colonies relatively easily. So most of the challenges that the rest of the planet's going to be struggling with and failing to succeed with, the French have in hand at the start of the era. And then finally, there's Turkey. Turkey has everything that it needs nearby. It can get food from Southeast Europe, primarily Bulgaria and Romania. It can get energy from Iraqi Kurdistan or Azerbaijan. It's got NATO's second most powerful army. There's no country near it that can really hold a candle to it in a meaningful way. And they've got a phenomenally young demography, so all of these advantages will last not just for years, but for decades. The only problem the Turks have is while they're more powerful than anyone in their neighborhood, and maybe even more powerful than everyone in their neighborhood, they're not strong enough to go in all directions at the same time. So they're going to have to choose. And until they can solidify their political system, and right now they're in this transition from semi-democracy to hardcore dictatorship, that means one guy, Erdogan, has to make the decision, where does he want his country to go? Everyone else is trying to manipulate them into going a direction away from them. So one of the reasons the Russians were involved in Syria is to try to bait the Turks into Syria, because if the Turks are in Syria, they can't also be in Ukraine. But on the backside of this, Turkey may have made some bad security decisions, but they're going to be a self-sufficient country in a neo-imperial setup in a world that is largely chaotic and broken down. And that's actually pretty good. Largely everybody else. I mean, that's a bit of an overstatement. There are parts of the world that are going to do all right. Southeast Asia, I think, is going to kind of come into its own for the first time. But all of the regional power centers that we've become convinced of as the up-and-comers are ones that are, for the most part, dependent on the Bretton Woods system. So I would say that the two biggest losers are China and Germany. For the Chinese, everything about their political unity is predicated on international stability, which means that China reverts to something that's actually more normal in its history. Fighting regions, a lot of internal chaos, warlords. For 3,000 years of Chinese history, this is what about 2,500 of it looks like. This is more normal for them. That we're in the atypical period right now. Germany's more and less complicated. And we're talking about Germany here. I mean, this is a country that went from economic destitution in 1935 to invading France 6 years later. The German capacity for regeneration and rebuilding is immense. And just because their entire economy is going to collapse does not mean that the Germans are removed from the board. They will reinvent themselves. But every time they reinvent themselves, their neighbors usually don't like what it looks like. The challenge is figuring out what they're going to do. Germany is one of the most advanced countries in the world. It's become one of the big successes of the Bretton Woods system. Germany that's no longer warlike and genocidal, but is free and democratic and even a little pacifist. I mean, this is amazing. But you change the circumstances and that goes away. Germany right now imports roughly 85% of its energy. Roughly 2/3 of its GDP is in some way dependent upon exports. If you take that away, the Germans have a choice to make. They suffer a 3/4 reduction in their standard of living, and they give